The Alpha wed her out of duty and turned away, until all of London admired his perfect Duchess. The airport was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Travelers moved like shadows, passing through the bright halls as if on some urgent pilgrimage, their eyes fixed on phones or luggage, their voices fading like echoes. Outside, the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, leaving a cold silver haze over the city. Somewhere, a plane roared across the sky, leaving a trail of light that seemed out of place in the growing twilight. Among the crowd, a man sat alone. He was tall, with a presence that seemed to bend the light around him. His skin was pale, almost luminous, and his hair dark as midnight. He wore a long coat that brushed his knees, and boots that made no sound on the polished floor. No one approached him, though everyone seemed to sense him. Travelers glanced, then looked away, as if meeting his gaze would awaken something they could not name. He had arrived from far away, from a land older than memory, a place of crowns and curses, of battles fought in silence and shadows. The world he had left behind had not forgiven him, nor had he forgiven himself. Yet here, in this strange, ordinary place, he felt the weight of loneliness as sharply as ever. Time passed differently for him, stretching endlessly like the corridors of a forgotten castle. And in this liminal space, he waited. It was then that he heard a small, clear voice. "Are you lost too, mister?" He looked down to see a little girl standing before him. She was no more than 7, with wide eyes that seemed far older than her age. Her hair was pale gold, loose and curling, and her coat was bright against the dim light of the terminal. She carried a small bag slung over her shoulder, and her tiny shoes tapped softly against the floor. The Vampire King's gaze sharpened. He was unused to children approaching him. Usually people feared him or ignored him completely. But this girl? She did not flinch. There was a calm certainty in her voice, a knowing that unsettled him. I am not lost," he said carefully, his voice low, smooth, carrying a weight of centuries. "But perhaps I am far from home." "You look very far away," she said simply. "Like you've been traveling for a long time." He blinked, momentarily startled. How could she know? No one had ever spoken to him like this. Even the humans he had tried to protect, to guide, had always been afraid. They could not see the shadow inside him, the cold loneliness that had stretched for centuries. But she seemed to notice it without fear. "What is your name?" he asked, his tones softer now. "Leora," she said. "And you?" "I have many names," he replied. "But here, you may call me Corvin." Leora nodded, as if that explained everything. "Corvin, I think you need help. Do you want me to help you?" For a moment he felt a strange stir inside him, a flicker of something long buried. Vulnerability, connection, a yearning he had not felt in centuries. "Perhaps," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the empty terminal. "Perhaps I do." And then the first shadow appeared. It moved like smoke along the walls of the airport, subtle but deliberate. He felt it before he saw it, a chill that raised the hairs along his neck, a darkness that seemed alive, whispering of danger and secrets. He glanced at Leora. She did not appear to notice. Or perhaps she did. and simply chose not to show it. "Come with me," he said, rising. His movements were fluid, deliberate, and without sound. He extended a hand, and Leora took it without hesitation. Together, they walked through the empty halls. The sounds of the airport, the distant rumble of luggage carts, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights, felt muted, as though they were walking in a dream. Corvin could feel the faint pulse of magic in the air, something hidden beneath the surface of the ordinary world. It was the same sense he had always felt when he traveled far from his home, a warning that something ancient was near. "Where are we going?" Leora asked, her small hand gripping his. "To find a place where we can be, unseen," he said. Leora nodded, as if she understood more than he expected. Unseen is sometimes the safest place, but only if you are not hiding. Corvin stopped mid-step, staring at her. The words struck him like a blade. How could a child understand the weight of centuries of guilt, the desire to hide from the world, the fear of being seen? He had worn masks for hundreds of years, yet she looked at him without pretense, as though she could see the truth of his soul. "You are strange," he said softly, almost to himself, "and dangerous." "You too," she replied with a small smile. "But maybe we are the same kind of lost." Maybe, just maybe, there was a place where he could exist without the endless shadow of his past. They moved through the airport, passing gates and waiting areas, until they reached a quiet corridor near the far end of the terminal. Corvin's eyes flicked constantly, alert to the movement of shadows, the shift of light, the faint hum of power he could feel in the air. He had learned to trust these instincts. They had saved him countless times. Leora suddenly stopped. "Here," she said, pointing to a door tucked in the corner. It was plain, unmarked, and yet something about it hummed with quiet power. "This is," Corvin began, but she interrupted him. "It is the waiting place," she said. "The place where lost things come to find themselves." He studied her, unsure whether to laugh or growl. Children spoke in riddles, but her voice carried a certainty he could not ignore. There was truth in her words, and he felt it deep in his bones. He stepped toward the door, hand on the handle, and hesitated. Something prickled along his spine. The shadows were closer now, circling, observing. He could sense them, feel their hunger, their curiosity, their malice. He turned to Leora, whose eyes were wide and serious. "Do you see them?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "They know you. But they do not know me, and I will protect you." Corvin felt a surge of emotion, strange and foreign. He had known centuries of power, of fear, of control, but he had never felt anyone's trust so complete. The little girl had offered him something no one had in ages: faith without question, courage without fear. "Then we shall enter together," he said. "And we shall see if lost things can indeed find their way." They stepped through the door, and the world seemed to shift. The fluorescent lights dimmed, replaced by a twilight glow that bathed the corridor in silver and shadow. The air was thick with the scent of old stone and faint magic, like a place forgotten by time. The shadows seemed to hesitate at the threshold, as though respecting some invisible law. Inside, the space stretched endlessly, larger than the terminal it had replaced. There were no gates or luggage carousels here, only soft lights, arching ceilings, and a silence that thrummed with potential. Corvin felt it in his chest, a strange warmth beneath his cold blood. For the first time in centuries, he allowed himself to breathe without the weight of suspicion pressing down. Leora walked ahead of him, small and fearless, guiding him deeper into the place. "See," she said softly, "it is safe here, if you are not hiding." Corvin watched her, feeling something fragile awaken. Perhaps he could be safe here. Perhaps he could even be human again, in a sense. But the shadows outside the door were not idle. Somewhere beyond the veil of the ordinary world, something ancient stirred, tracking him, watching his every movement. And though Leora held his hand tightly, he knew that the peace he felt was temporary, a brief respite before the storm that had followed him for centuries finally arrived. He drew a deep breath, feeling the pulse of his own blood, the weight of time in his bones, and the faint, growing warmth of something that could not be named. Hope. Or perhaps destiny. And then Leora spoke, her voice quiet but urgent. "They know where we are, and they will not wait forever." Corvin's eyes narrowed, sensing the first true threat in years, and the faintest trace of a smile touched his lips. For the first time he was not alone, and he was not afraid. But the shadows were patient, and eternity had taught them cunning. The night was far from over, and in the distance a figure stepped into the light, watching, waiting, and smiling with knowledge that only time and darkness could give. The airport corridor behind the door seemed to stretch endlessly, as if it had absorbed the time of 1,000 forgotten travelers. Corvin walked beside Leora, feeling the pulse of magic in the air, a subtle rhythm that whispered of old secrets and unseen watchers. Every step he took was measured, careful, yet the warmth of the little girl's hand gave him a strange courage he had not felt in centuries. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice low, like wind moving through an empty hall. "To the place where lost things find themselves," Leora repeated, as if speaking it aloud would make it real. "But first, you must remember something." Corvin's head tilted slightly. "Remember what?" "Who you were," she said simply, "and what you forgot." He stopped mid-step, staring at her. For centuries, he had tried not to remember, had buried memory under power, under shadow, under cold solitude. The thought of digging through that pain made him tense, yet the child's eyes held no malice, only clarity. Somehow she knew the weight of his guilt without needing to name it. "Perhaps it is better I remain forgotten," he said, the words heavy with centuries of regret. "Memory is a dangerous thing." "Danger can be faced," Leora said, "or it can control you. I choose to face it." Corvin considered her words, feeling an unfamiliar stirring in his chest. That small defiance, that courage, seemed almost impossible in a world like his, where centuries of life had only brought him sorrow and isolation. He walked on, silently admitting, if only to himself, that perhaps she was right. The corridor began to change. The polished airport tiles faded into dark stone, like the floors of an old castle. Shadows stretched along the walls, forming shapes that were both familiar and alien. The air grew colder yet. Beneath it, he could feel a faint warmth, a promise of something waiting. Leora skipped forward, her small boots clicking softly on the stone. "This is the city of the forgotten," she said. "Most people pass through and never notice it. But we can see it." Corvin followed her, eyes alert. There was a strange energy here, like memories hung in the air, waiting for someone to claim them. He felt it tugging at his mind, pulling pieces of himself he had long tried to ignore. Faces appeared in shadows, some familiar, some unknown, whispering names he had buried beneath centuries of silence. "Be careful," he murmured, his voice like steel brushing against silk. "The forgotten are not always gentle." "They are only lost," Leora said. "And some are lonely, like you." Her words cut through the armor he had worn for centuries. He remembered the nights spent in empty halls, the long hunts through cold forests, the centuries of solitude where not even the wind dared approach. He had ruled kingdoms, but he had never truly ruled his own loneliness. A soft wind stirred in the corridor, carrying whispers that tugged at the edges of his mind. Images flashed. A throne consumed by shadow, a crown of broken glass, a woman's face that shimmered like moonlight. He shook his head, trying to focus, and Leora's voice grounded him. "Do not fear," she said. "We face it together." For the first time, he allowed himself to believe her. Together. They walked through the city, passing alleyways that glowed faintly with spectral light. Buildings rose and fell like breathing shadows, some tall as mountains, others crumbled to dust before they could be touched. Time seemed to bend here, moments stretching into hours, hours into decades. Corvin sensed that this place was alive, aware of his presence, and perhaps even of the curse he carried. The curse had followed him for centuries, the mark of eternal life, a hunger for connection he could never fully satisfy, and the shadow of mistakes too numerous to count. And yet, in this strange city, the curse felt less like a burden and more like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Leora led him to a fountain at the center of the city. Its waters shimmered silver, reflecting images that moved and changed. When Corvin looked closely, he saw glimpses of his past, a young boy crowned in a world he had not yet understood. A woman whose eyes had haunted him for centuries, a battle fought in silence, and the first time he had felt true loneliness. "Is this real?" he asked, his voice tight. "Or just a trick of the shadows?" "The past is real, but it can teach you, if you are brave enough to see it." Corvin reached out, letting his fingers brush the surface of the water. Images shifted, memories bleeding into one another. He saw choices made in haste, words left unsaid, and lives lost because of his pride and fear. Pain, regret, and longing rose within him like a tide. For the first time in centuries, he allowed himself to feel it fully. "Why show me this?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Because you cannot move forward if you forget who you are," Leora said. "And because you are not as lost as you think." Her words warmed something deep within him. He had thought himself beyond redemption, beyond hope, beyond the chance for connection. But here, in this city of the forgotten, a spark of possibility flickered. Then, without warning, the ground beneath the fountain trembled. Shadows surged from the edges of the city, gathering like a storm. Corvin instinctively stepped in front of Leora, his senses alert, his body coiled for action. "They know you are here," he said. "Who?" she asked, her small hand gripping his coat. Those who hunt the past, he replied, those who remember what should remain forgotten. The shadows moved faster, taking shape as tall, dark figures with glowing eyes. They were neither fully human nor fully spirit, existing somewhere between the worlds. Their presence pressed against Corvin, testing his resolve, daring him to retreat. He felt the weight of centuries of training, of battles fought in darkness, of power wielded without mercy. And yet, he did not strike immediately. He studied the shadows, learning their rhythm, their intent. They were patient, intelligent, waiting for him to make a mistake. Leora tugged at his coat. "We can't fight them forever," she said. "We have to run." Corvin nodded. His mind raced, searching for a way to protect her, to survive, to confront the danger without succumbing to the shadow's influence. He sensed that they were drawn not just to him, but to something she carried, something ancient, hidden, vital. "Follow me," he said, and they ran. The city shifted as they moved, streets bending and twisting, buildings reshaping themselves. Time and space seemed fluid, but Corvin's senses kept him steady. Leora ran beside him, fearless, her small hand still in his. Somehow, in the chaos, he felt a strange calm. Together, they were more than predator and prey, more than master and child. They were allies against a world that had long forgotten them. They reached a high bridge overlooking the city, the river below shimmering with silver light. Corvin paused, catching his breath, and Leora clung to his side. "They are coming," he said, voice low. "Soon they will reach us." "Then we will face them," she said. Together. Her courage stirred something inside him, something he had not felt in centuries. Hope. And with hope came a promise that perhaps the chains of the forgotten could be broken, that even the deepest darkness could be challenged, and that he could find a path back to something resembling humanity. But before he could respond, a figure appeared on the bridge ahead of them, tall, cloaked, with eyes that glowed like embers. Corvin froze. The shadows were no longer behind them. One had stepped into the light. "Corvin," the figure said, voice echoing as if from a tomb, "you cannot escape what you have done. And you cannot protect her forever." Leora clutched his hand tighter. "Who is it?" she asked, eyes wide but steady. "A reflection of the past," Corvin whispered, his voice rough, "and a warning of what is to come." The figure's smile was slow, deliberate, and cruel. "You have been hiding for centuries, yet here you are, exposed. The world remembers you, even if you have tried to forget." Corvin felt the first true surge of fear in decades, not for himself, but for Leora. She had trusted him, followed him, believed in him, and now, because of his past, she was in danger. The bridge seemed to stretch endlessly before them, the city below fading into mist. The shadows gathered on either side, forming a corridor of darkness that pressed in. Corvin tightened his grip on Leora's hand, feeling the warmth of life against his cold blood, the reminder that some things were worth protecting, even if it meant facing the deepest darkness of his own history. "We must move," he said, his voice firm. "Now." and as they turned to run, the figure raised a hand, and the shadows surged forward, reaching for them like living water. Corvin's heart, long hardened by centuries of solitude, beat with something new: determination, protectiveness, and a spark of emotion he had thought forever lost. The city of the forgotten had revealed itself fully, and the chains of the past were tightening. But Corvin and Leora ran on, together, defying the shadows, daring to hope, and in the distance another whisper came, faint but chilling. The game has only begun. The city of the forgotten had grown darker since the bridge, the streets bending and twisting like a labyrinth that reflected Corvin's own fractured memories. Shadows pooled in the corners, moving as if alive, whispering words that were both familiar and frightening. He could feel them pressing against his mind, testing his resolve, daring him to falter. Leora's hand remained in his, a small, firm anchor in the shifting storm. She had stopped asking questions, instead watching the shadows with an intensity that should have been impossible for a child. Somehow, she understood the danger they faced, and somehow she trusted him to keep her safe. Corvin, she said quietly, why did they hate you so much? The question was heavier than it seemed, filled with centuries of betrayal, loss, and regret. He had learned long ago that the world remembered every wrong, even when he tried to bury it. He had ruled kingdoms and fought battles that no one would ever know, and yet those same people now hunted him, some alive, some spirits lingering in the edges of the forgotten city. Because I am a shadow, he finally said, voice low and rough, and shadows frighten the living. Because I carry the weight of what I cannot undo. Maybe shadows can help too, she said. Her words were innocent, but there was wisdom in them, as if she understood that darkness and light were not enemies, only parts of the same whole. He allowed himself a brief glance at her. She was small, fragile-looking, yet unshakable. And in her eyes he saw not fear, but determination, a reminder that hope could exist even in the depths of despair. The figure from the bridge appeared again, this time closer. Its cloak billowed as it moved, shadows flowing around it like smoke. The glow from its eyes cut through the darkness, piercing Corvin with a look that felt like both accusation and challenge. You cannot hide, the figure said, voice echoing like a tombstone in the night. You cannot save her. And you cannot forgive yourself. Corvin's jaw tightened. Every instinct in his long-lived body bristled with tension. He had faced armies, storms, and monsters in the past. But this presence, this reflection of all his guilt and failure, was unlike anything he had endured. It was as if the city itself was alive, channeling every regret he had tried to bury into a single form, a single confrontation. I do not forgive myself, he said quietly, but I will not let her suffer because of me. The figure paused, as if surprised by his defiance. Shadows shifted around it, forming shapes of the people he had lost, friends, enemies, lovers, and innocents who had died because of his choices. Their silent faces stared at him, unblinking, reminding him of his failings. You are weak, the figure said. You cannot escape what you are, and yet you linger, clinging to hope. Foolish. Corvin felt a heat rise within him, a storm that had lain dormant for centuries. His hands clenched, his teeth gritted, but he did not strike. Instead, he focused on Leora, her small hand in his, the warmth of life against his cold blood. For the first time, he realized that the strength he needed was not from anger or power, but from connection, from love, even if it was the innocent, pure love of a child who had no reason to trust him. "Leora," he said softly, "we need to move. Follow me carefully." She nodded, her eyes steady. "I'm not afraid. Not while I'm with you." Together, they ran through the twisting streets of the city. The shadows followed, crawling along walls and floors, growing taller and darker, forming tendrils that reached for them. Corvin's senses were sharp, his reflexes honed over centuries, but he no longer moved solely to survive. He moved to protect her, to guide her through danger she could not fully understand. And in that purpose, he found a clarity he had not known for centuries. They came to a courtyard, open and strange, where the air shimmered with faint silver light. Statues of forgotten kings and queens lined the edges, their eyes hollow, but their faces serene. Corvin paused, breathing heavily. He could feel the presence of the figure behind them, waiting, calculating, and he knew it would not relent. "Stay close," he whispered. "We cannot let it separate us." Leora nodded, stepping beside him, her small fingers gripping his coat. She pointed to a fountain at the center of the courtyard, its waters glowing faintly. "That fountain," she said, "it shows the truth of your heart." Corvin frowned. He had spent centuries hiding from himself, denying every truth that hurt too much to face. But he could not hide from her, nor from the shadows. He stepped toward the fountain, Leora beside him, and peered into the water. At first, he saw nothing but his own reflection, pale, sharp-featured, and eternal. Then the images began to shift. Memories long buried rose from the depths. A castle in ruins, a queen whose eyes had once held love for him, a child he had failed to protect. The images pressed upon him, demanding recognition. "Do not look away," Leora whispered. "See it, all of it." Corvin's hands clenched at his sides. Pain, guilt, and sorrow surged through him, threatening to overwhelm. But then he felt her hand on his arm, grounding him. Her presence reminded him that he was not alone. That, even in darkness, there was light. "I see it," he said, voice breaking slightly. "All of it. And yet, I do not know if I can make it right." "Perhaps you cannot undo everything," she said. "But you can choose what comes next. You can protect, you can care, you can be more than the shadows you carry." Corvin looked at her, feeling a warmth he had thought extinct. For centuries, he had believed himself beyond redemption, beyond hope. And yet here was this small, fearless girl teaching him that change was possible, that the heart could endure even when burdened by eternity. The figure emerged from the shadows again, closer now, its form more solid, more threatening. Corvin stepped forward, placing himself between Leora and the figure. "Do not touch her," he said, voice sharp as steel. The figure tilted its head, smiling. "She is part of your fate, and fate cannot be escaped. You will fail, and she will be lost because of you." For a moment he felt the darkness rise within him, the centuries of rage and isolation threatening to consume reason. But he held on to Leora's hand, the warmth of her trust anchoring him. "No," he said firmly, "she will not be lost. Not by me, not by you, not by the past I carry. I will protect her, even if it costs me everything." The figure laughed softly, a sound that echoed through the courtyard like the chime of shattered bells. "We shall see," it said, stepping back into the shadows. "The night is young, and the path to redemption is steep." Corvin exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain slightly. The figure had retreated, for now. But he knew it would return, stronger and more cunning. He turned to Leora, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You are remarkable," he said, his voice almost gentle. "Do you know that? Even here, in a world of shadows, you shine." Leora smiled, her eyes reflecting the silver glow of the fountain. "And you are not as alone as you think. Not anymore." Corvin felt a strange surge of emotion, a mixture of gratitude, longing, and something deeper, a sense that perhaps he could reclaim a part of himself he had lost long ago. He had been a king of shadows, feared and isolated. But now he felt the faint pulse of humanity returning, fragile but real. They spent the night in the courtyard, moving only when necessary, hiding when the shadows drew near. The city whispered around them, alive with memories and half-formed spirits. Corvin felt the weight of his past pressing on him, yet the presence of Leora beside him gave him purpose. He was not just surviving anymore. He was choosing to fight for something worth protecting. By dawn, the first pale light seeped into the city. The shadows retreated, but the figure's warning lingered in Corvin's mind. The path to redemption would not be easy, and the threats from his past would not relent. Yet as he looked at Leora, still asleep against his side, he felt a resolve he had not known for centuries. He would face the darkness, he would confront the past, and he would protect her no matter the cost. But even as he vowed this, a new awareness grew in his mind. Leora was not just a child, she was something more. A guide, a fragment of his own forgotten soul, perhaps even a key to lifting the curse he carried. The thought both frightened and comforted him. He realized that to save her, he would need to save himself, and that would require facing truths he had long avoided, truths buried in pain, sorrow, and regret. And so, as the city of the forgotten stretched in silence around them, Corvin made a choice. He would not run. He would not hide. He would step into the night, into the shadows, and confront the weight of eternity itself. For Leora, for himself, for the possibility of redemption. And in the darkness, the first whispers of the past began to stir, promising trials that would test everything he held dear. The night was far from over, and the chains of the forgotten were beginning to tighten. The city of the forgotten was silent now, but not peaceful. Shadows lingered along the edges, restless and hungry, whispering of centuries-old grudges and mistakes that could not easily be erased. Corvin stood at the center of the courtyard, Leora at his side, her small hand gripping his. He could feel the weight of the past pressing down upon him, the figure that had stalked them for nights now, waiting, patient and deliberate in the darkness. The morning light barely touched the streets, and yet the city seemed alive, watching, judging, as if it knew what was coming. Corvin's gaze shifted to Leora. She had slept little, her eyes bright with awareness and courage that should not have belonged to a child. Yet in her he saw hope, fragile, fierce, unshakable. It was the same hope he had almost forgotten centuries ago. "Corvin," she said softly, "whatever happens, we face it together." He tightened his grip on her hand. "Together," he repeated, a vow more binding than any crown or chain. From the shadows the figure emerged, cloaked and silent, eyes burning with the weight of centuries. Its presence carried accusation, challenge, and a cruel reminder of all that Corvin had tried to bury. "You cannot protect her," it said, voice like frost on stone. "You cannot redeem yourself. The past is heavier than your strength." Corvin inhaled slowly, feeling the cold bite of fear and regret, but he refused to bow. For the first time he realized that strength was not measured by power alone, but by courage, by the willingness to face the darkness within. "I may carry the past," he said, voice steady, "but I will not allow it to control her. Not today, not ever." "Foolish. Even love cannot save you." "Love?" Corvin repeated, eyes narrowing. "Perhaps, but even shadows cannot extinguish it completely." With a sudden motion, the figure struck, summoning the shadows around it into swirling tendrils, reaching, seeking, trying to separate Corvin from Leora. He reacted instantly, stepping forward, moving with a speed and grace that belied the weight of centuries. He wrapped himself around Leora, shielding her, and the shadows struck him instead. Cold, biting, relentless. Yet he did not falter. He felt something stirring in the fountain at the center of the courtyard. The water shimmered and glowed, reflecting not just their images, but memories, emotions, choices, and paths that had been lost to time. Corvin realized then that the fountain was more than a mirror. It was a bridge, a connection between the living and the forgotten, the present and the past. "Leora," he said, "look into the water. Remember who we are, who we can be." The girl leaned forward, peering into the fountain. Light swirled around her, illuminating the courtyard with silver brilliance. Images of Corvin's past filled the waters, mistakes, regrets, and failures. Yet also moments of courage, tenderness, and fleeting joy. Leora reached out, touching the water, and the glow intensified, spilling outward like liquid hope. The figure recoiled, hissing, as the light pierced its shadows. "No, this cannot be." Corvin felt a new power rise within him, not born of hunger or fear, but of connection, of the bond he shared with Leora. The centuries of solitude, of guilt, of endless wandering began to fracture, replaced by clarity. He could choose. He could face the past, forgive himself, and protect what mattered. He stepped forward, hand extended toward the figure. "I will not run," he said. "I will not hide. And I will not fail her, or myself, again." The shadows shrieked, writhing as they were drawn into the fountain's glow. The figure tried to resist, but the bond between Corvin and Leora strengthened the light, pushing the darkness back. The courtyard shook, and the air shimmered with the power of redemption. "Together," Corvin said. looking at Leora. She nodded, placing her hand over his. A burst of light erupted from the fountain, blinding and pure. Shadows screamed and scattered, dissolving into nothingness. The figure let out a final cry before vanishing entirely, leaving only silence in its wake. Corvin sank to his knees, exhausted, yet a warmth he had not felt in centuries spread through him. Leora knelt beside him, eyes wide with wonder and relief. "You did it," she whispered. "You faced it." "No," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "We did it together." The city around them shifted, slowly transforming. Buildings straightened, streets cleared, and the air seemed lighter, less oppressive. The city of the forgotten had begun to remember, to forgive, to release its long-held grudges. Corvin realized that the redemption was not his alone. It was shared, shaped by trust, courage, and connection. Leora smiled, a small, radiant light in the quiet morning. "I think we're not lost anymore," she said. Corvin looked at her, feeling the centuries of pain fall away like ash. He had been a king of shadows, feared and alone, but now he understood what it meant to be alive. To care. To hope. "You are right," he said softly. "We are found." The wind whispered through the courtyard, carrying the faint echo of lives long forgotten but now at rest. Corvin breathed deeply, savoring the sensation of freedom, of possibility, of connection. And yet, even in that moment, he knew life would not always be so simple. The world was vast, filled with choices, dangers, and challenges. But now, he would face them not with fear or solitude, but with courage and trust, and with Leora by his side. He rose to his feet, brushing the dust from his coat, and extended his hand. "Shall we continue?" he asked, a faint smile on his lips. Leora took his hand firmly. "Yes," she said. "Together we can face anything." They walked through the city, side by side, the light of the fountain fading behind them but leaving a lingering glow that seemed to mark their path. Shadows no longer dared to follow, and the weight of the past felt lighter, tempered by courage and love. Corvin glanced at Leora, her small figure strong and fearless beside him. He felt something stir within, a sense of purpose, of renewal, and a hope that had been lost for centuries. He realized that redemption was not just about confronting the past, but about choosing to protect, to care, to connect. And in that choice, he had found something more valuable than power, more enduring than time, the spark of humanity. As they reached the edge of the city, the horizon glowed with the first true light of dawn. The shadows of the past were behind them, scattered like ashes on the wind, and though the journey ahead was uncertain, Corvin knew that he would never face it alone. He looked at Leora, her eyes bright with wonder, and whispered, "Perhaps we were both lost, but now we are found." She smiled, and for the first time he allowed himself to feel fully alive. A being of shadows, yes, but one capable of warmth, of hope, and of connection. The city of the forgotten was no longer a prison, but a place of beginnings. And as they walked toward the light, hand in hand, the faint echo of whispers seemed almost like applause, honoring the courage of the lost and the strength of the redeemed. Corvin knew that challenges would come again, that darkness would never fully disappear, but now he was ready. He had faced the past, protected the innocent, and embraced the spark of life that had long been buried. And in that moment, he understood the truest lesson of all: even shadows could find the light. And so the Vampire King, once alone for centuries, walked into the dawn with a child's hand in his, no longer lost, no longer bound by the chains of the forgotten, but free to face whatever came next, together. The night had ended. The city had remembered. And the crown of ashes that had weighed upon his soul for centuries had begun to crumble, leaving behind the possibility of life, hope, and redemption. The journey was not over. It never would be entirely, but for the first time, Corvin believed that he could endure it, not alone, but with someone who made the shadows worthwhile. And Leora, smiling beside him, was proof that even in the darkest night, the smallest light could shine the brightest.